Hello and welcome. I'm Patrick Cunningham, and along with Judy Colby-George, we will be your moderators again for this virtual Maine GIS user group brown bag lunch and learn. We're excited to be hosting our third lunch and learn of 2021. This one is remote ID for drones, the challenges and opportunities for GIS and surveying in the FAA's coming flight rules. So today's featured speaker is Sam Knight, the Director of Product Management for Blue Marble Geographics. So we're excited to have him here today. And just a little bit of background by way of background, the Maine GIS User Group is a nonprofit organization that promotes the awareness of and encourages the coordinated development and effective use of geographic information and related technologies. MEGUG focuses our efforts in the areas of policy liaison, networking, research, education, and public relations. The group facilitates discussion and exchange of information and ideas in these areas by hosting regular meetings, workshops, and roundtables open to both members and non-members. Historically, traditionally, we usually have about 3 or 4 in-person conference events a year, but in the year of COVID, we have pivoted to these virtual lunch and learn meetings. So far they seem to be pretty successful. But certainly we would love to have you be more involved in Maine GIS User Group, and ways that you can be a part of what we're doing, of course, is presenting. We are always in need of presenters, and these brown bag lunch and learns, we keep talking amongst ourselves that they're meant to be casual, educational. If you have any kind of GIS project you want to share, it doesn't have to be an earth-shattering finding. In fact, it doesn't even have to be a successful project. Folks are looking to learn and share, and we would love to give you a platform to do that. Hopefully very soon, again, we'll be able to do it in person in our in-person meetings. But if you're interested in presenting on one of these brown bag lunch and learns, please do let us know. Our email address will appear later on, but it's megugboard@gmail.com. Or if you're interested in helping out, we do have various committees that the board runs, and members are certainly welcome to be on the committees. So you could certainly reach out and let us know if you'd like to be a little bit more involved that way. Right now on the docket, our next brown bag lunch and learn is upcoming in April, and it is analog GIS in the digital GIS age, a municipal archive and its interconnection with the modern digital GIS mapping of a 389-year-old city, with Dr. George Carhart, engineering archivist for the city of Portland. So we're kind of pretty excited about that. That should prove to be an interesting look at historical mapping and modern day mapping. And of course, if you've missed any of our lunch and learns, they're all on our YouTube channel. And if you haven't yet hopped over there, please do and subscribe. We would like to see our subscriber count get a little bit higher. Our views are pretty high in some of the past lunch and learns, but we'd like to have a little bit higher following. So help us out with a like and subscribe, as they say. And if you missed last month's, I definitely want to put in a plug for that. It was really a great presentation by Matt Doobie on gerrymandering and GIS, really interesting topic. And many of the ones prior to, I think you'd find educational and helpful. So maybe something to do when you have a little bit of free time. I would definitely encourage you to check those out. So I'm going to hand it over to Judy to introduce our speaker.
Thanks, Patrick. We're really pleased to have Sam Knight here today. He's been at Blue Marble since 2004. In that time, he's worked in tech support, training, Q&A, and eventually transitioned to product manager and then director of product management. He's responsible for developing and leading Blue Marble's successful applied geodesy training program, and he's led hundreds of GIS and geodetics courses, and he's a frequent speaker at industry conferences, try to make tricky geodetic concepts accessible at a practical level. His other role at Blue Marble is as a commercially certified drone pilot to support the company's work in drone-based 3D modeling. So we're really looking forward to hearing from him today. And I'll turn it back over to Sam.
So thanks for that introduction there, Judy. And thanks, Patrick, as well. So today we're going to be talking about a really sort of legally complex technical topic. There's a lot of stuff we're going to go through. I'm going to probably be going at a pretty good clip, rounding off some of the corners. There's this new thing called remote ID that the FAA has been talking about really for the last year. There's a lot of complex rules as a part of anything the FAA does. They're known for their complexity. We're going to try and break some of these down, talk about the evolution of the rule throughout its draft stage to where we are now, where the final rule has been released within the last couple of months and will be phasing in over the next few years. So let's see, we already did that. Don't need to reintroduce me. So my role at Blue Marble, I'm a GIS person first. So I've been with Blue Marble for a long time. I've really only been in drones for probably about the last 5 years, and I've held my Part 107 certificate for the last 3 years. So I'm a GIS person first and a drone pilot second. The drone pilot stuff is really interesting, and I think it can do a lot for us, but I'm kind of like a lot of users where I have the GIS side, and this is a new section to me. There's a lot of new stuff to learn. You have to become an expert in a whole secondary topic to be a certified drone pilot. So we're going to be talking about all of these little bits and pieces, what goes on, and what it's going to be able to do for us in GIS and in surveying. So the background on remote ID is that a little over a year ago, the FAA proposed this new draft rule. They issued what was called a Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, the NPRM, and this was generally known as remote ID. Over the last year, it caused an instant uproar. Some folks were all about it, some folks hated it. There's actually a pending lawsuit that's going to become active pretty soon as that gets worked out, now that the finalized rules have come out and people are starting to digest exactly what they mean and what the restrictions are and what the opportunities are. So we're gonna take a little bit of a look of sort of the current state of flight rules, what the proposal was, and where that's evolved to, and now where we're going to be going off into the future. So the current UAS flight rules, and UAS is simply Unmanned Aerial System. You may also hear UAV very commonly, or drone. These are all really just sort of interchangeable words. There's two major sides to the flight rules. One is hobby rules. They're much more open, and one is the commercial rules, and those are much more tightly regulated. Because we're focused on the GIS side, we're all hopefully getting paid for what we do. We're on the commercial side. If you're doing anything where you're going to receive compensation for flying that drone, you know, whether you're a professional pilot all the time or whether you're a GIS person who's going to go out and, you know, take a few photos to stitch together into a mosaic, you're a commercial pilot. That's what it comes down to. You're not going to worm out of that one. So anybody that's going to fly for work has to have what's called a Part 107 certificate. It takes a 60 question test, and it covers a massive amount of possible knowledge. It's a randomly generated test within specific topic areas, and you have to first pass that test with at least an 80% or better, and then you have to recertify every 2 years. So if you think about, we go and get our driver's license to drive an automobile when we're 16, and we never have to take another test again. To fly a drone, you've got to stay current on all of the changing flight rules as they evolve, you know, very quickly. It's the same with manned aviation. They have to recertify very frequently. Surveyors, if there's any surveyors in the crowd, they know about continuing education credits and staying current on the state of the art and things like that for their licensure as well. So to be a commercial pilot, you're tied into this loop of staying current on all of the latest flight restrictions and things like that. And those include, this is a non-exhaustive list, but the main thrust of the rules here are we have to fly below 400 feet above the ground level. That's not sea level. So below 400 feet above ground, unless you're near a structure where you can have 400 feet over the top of that. We're only allowed to fly during daylight, and around dusk, there are some extra restrictions about having marker lights and things like that. We have to stay within visual line of sight, which is a really interesting topic. because the FAA does not define what that means. Basically, they assume it's a common sense definition. So you have to be able to see the drone to be able to fly the drone. So you're not allowed to say, fly off over the other side of a mountain. You're not allowed to fly up into the clouds and so on. You can't fly behind trees where you can't see the drone and such, but there's no strict definition on what line of sight actually means. You must give way to any and all manned aircraft, and this is really at a very important point about where remote ID has gone. Long and short is if a manned aircraft comes along, you go down, you get out of the way. You have to give way. There's obvious life safety implications in that, and it is a much more common factor than you might expect. I've had to land during a data collection mission unexpectedly 3 times in the last several years because an aircraft came through way too low. Shouldn't have been in the area, but it's my responsibility to get out of their way. Flight over people is not allowed unless they're directly participating with your flight operations, and you're not allowed to drive around and fly at the same time. So even if you're riding shotgun, you're not allowed to be driving around in a car flying a drone. And there are some asterisks on some of these where if you're way out in the boonies, you're allowed to be in a car moving and stuff like that. But I want to stress this is not an exhaustive list. There's really a lot of stuff you got to pay attention to do this in compliance with all the regulations. So if you're not a pilot, there's a lot more reading you're going to have to do if you want to learn about some of these topics. So why do we need all these rules? We touched on life safety with manned aviation and stuff like that. A typical something like a quadcopter, if something goes wrong with it, say it loses power, it becomes a brick. It just falls right out of the air, straight down. That could hurt people. It could do property damage, things like that. So there's a need for rules. Lately, more and more folks are getting into drones. So it's a huge area of growth in the sort of tech sector, if you will. And incidents are on the rise. Whether or not they've actually happened, whether or not there was a drone anywhere nearby, people think that there have been drones nearby. And so drones are getting blamed for a lot of stuff they've done and a lot of stuff that nobody's really proven they've done. The big thing here is some of the numbers. If you look at how many drones are registered, this is all information off the FAA website as of last week. So there's over 800,000 drones registered in the US, just in the US. The breakdown there is 375,000 of them, almost 376,000 are commercial drones, and then almost 500,000 recreational drones. There's a big asterisk on the recreational drones in that most drone pilots don't just have one drone, and you don't have to uniquely identify every single drone with a registration. So those recreational drones that are registered, that's essentially just recreational pilots that have registered a drone. The estimation is that there's somewhere between 3 and 5 drones on average for every recreational registration. Myself, I can vouch, drones are a little addictive. I have 5 of them. So the numbers on the recreational drones are way, way higher than the official count. Certified pilots, there's over 200,000 of them in the US. If you think about an industry that didn't really exist, 10 years ago, that's growing very, very rapidly. And with that rapid growth of the industry, drone use is changing. So what we can do with drones, what we can do with all the sensors that can ride on a drone, what people are doing with drones for fun, strapping a GoPro on it and going out and doing stunt maneuvers and stuff like that. There's this huge evolution of how drones are being operated. Couple of news articles here. You'll see there was this stuff that made the national news in Colorado, these weird, creepy drones that were flying around at night, and they were creeping people out. Nobody ever actually saw a drone. It was just lights in the sky, and everybody said it was drones, but nobody was ever really sure. That was roughly around the same time that the Starlink satellites were getting put up in space. Nobody ever found the drones there. We had one ourselves here in Maine that made national news. Down in Gorham, a woman said she saw a drone hovering over her backyard and it was following her around as she drove around town. and it followed her from town to town. And then a police officer said he saw it too. If you ever see any of the video that goes on with these, they saw a bright light in the sky and said it was a drone. But the point is, whether or not these were actually drones doing these operations, people have this fear about drones. So there's a lot of, they're getting blamed for a lot of stuff in the same way that every new technology does that's a disruptive technology. So regulations are, there's a perceived need for regulations, but there's also this need for regulations to help us transition into what we say integration of drones into the national airspace. That's the FAA's big line.
Hey,
so
Sam, we have a question. Do you know if we need the same certificate as a municipal government employee, the same commercial certificate?
No, there's actually some complexity there. So the public use of drones in the context of like a municipal operation, they're actually able to self-certify. It is a complex process. I could talk for an hour about what's involved there, but I would encourage you to look into the specifics of that, maybe seek some guidance outside of this context. But municipal operations like police, public works and things like that, they are actually able to self-certify. There is a lot to it though. It covers the same types of operations that would be covered under a commercial operation though.
Interesting. Okay, thanks.
So the national airspace is, we talk about integrating drones into the national airspace. But what does that have to do with me is always the big question. So in terms of the FAA and ruling the sky, basically the FAA is sort of like the police for the skies, if you will. They set the rules. They have an enforcement division and stuff like that. The national airspace is everything above the tops of the blades of grass or over the trees. That's essentially it. It's everywhere. So your backyard, when you mow the lawn, the national airspace goes down a little bit. When your grass is taller, it's growing up a little bit. It is everything navigable outside. There's a lot of argument about where that navigable space is, and does the federal government really have the right to regulate the airspace within my backyard? Very hot topic, but the FAA asserts that they control everything over the grass. Doesn't cover enclosed spaces, so there every once in a while you'll see stuff about like LiDAR being flown inside a warehouse, flying drones inside a warehouse and stuff like that. Doesn't cover enclosed spaces. And the context of that is manned aircraft are supposed to stay above 500 feet most of the time. So we fly below 400 feet as drone operators. That's our requirement. Manned aircraft are supposed to stay above 500 feet, but it's a little bit like the speed limits on the interstate. Sometimes you'll see sightseeing aircraft dipping down way lower than they're supposed to be. You'll find other folks, I forget what they're called, paragliders or something like that, the guys that strap giant fans on their backs and have a parachute and go fly around, or ultralights. You'll find those down in lower elevations sometimes. Most survey and drone work takes place between 150 feet up to that 400 feet above ground level height. So that's where all of our regulations apply. If you go above 400 feet and you're not near like a tower or something like that, you're in trouble zone. So the proposed rules of remote ID, what these sought to do was to essentially put a digital license plate on every drone in the air. Just like we have license plates for our cars that you can see visibly because we're all down at the same level. The idea is that a drone should be broadcasting something digital because it's, they're zipping around in the sky, you can't read them. So having a tail number like a manned aircraft just isn't going to work. So they're talking about having this little digital ping that would be internet connected and a local radio broadcast. So drones are controlled via radio link. And so that's like, okay, local broadcast, they've already got most of the hardware for that. But the internet connection was a huge new requirement. And what they wanted to say was that a drone had to have both an internet connection and this local broadcast capability. These units had to come from approved makers. So no more amateur built quadcopters or fixed wings or anything like that would be able to have what they called a standard remote ID unit. And the stuff it would be broadcasting was basically its tag number, so its license plate number, and where it is, and its attitude, things like that, lat long, height, how fast it's going, some other stuff, but also the controller location. So where you're standing on the ground with the controls in your hand. Some of that started to freak people out a little bit. Drones without the remote ID capability, they would have to stay very, very close to the operator. They would have to stay within a 400-foot radius dome of the operator. For where we can fly now, recreationally and commercially, it's within line of sight, and that is generally considered to be way past 400 feet. So that started to freak people out as well. They also introduced this idea of what they called a FRIA, a FAA recognized identification area. And that's essentially, you can think of those like a Model RC type airfield. If anybody's familiar with sort of what you think of as old school model aircraft, there's an organization called the Academy of Model Aeronautics, and they have local airfields. They're essentially like little teeny mini airports where people go fly radio controlled aircraft. Those types of operations could be recognized by the FAA for a year, and then there would be no new ones allowed to be created, and they would then also die off over time. They would never add another new one. So there was a big pressure on this network connected drone capability, and that really freaked a lot of people out. Every single drone would also need a unique registration. That was another piece, and that started kind of scaring a lot of the people on the hobby side. So I mentioned I have 5 of my own recreational drones. This picture is 2 of them. They're one of them, the big one is a drone I built myself, and the other one is an off-the-shelf freestyle drone. It's just for zipping around and having fun, basically. Each of these has the same license plate number on it, if you will. Because they're both recreational drones. So I have my pilot number, and that goes on every drone I fly. So if I have 5 drones, that means now I need to get 5 numbers, and each number costs $5. So it starts to add on a little bit of cost, not much, gets you 3 years of registration. But there are people that have many drones, and it starts to be a factor people think about. So the consequences of some of these rules, the things it was supposed to unlock is, first and foremost, everybody was really excited about beyond visual line of sight flight. And the first thing that everybody popped right up on was thinking package delivery. Amazon, UPS, FedEx, all of these package delivery companies really want beyond visual line of sight, because that's what they need to do to have a drone go zip down the street and drop a box on your doorstep. Night operations were going to be part of this with all the remote broadcast stuff. Flight over people is sort of related. It wasn't directly in the remote ID thing, but there's a bunch of rules they were proposing all at the same time to come out. So there are some pretty big carrots in this proposal. The downsides were really big, though. They got a lot of people on the commercial side, even people that are generally for advancements towards things like beyond visual line of sight, really made some people pull back. The requirement of internet access for the entire flight would be really crippling. If you think about what it's needed for internet access over like a cell phone network, here we are all in Maine. Think about how many dead spots you drive through with your cell phone as you're walking around. Your drone needs the same technology to maintain that radio link. There are large chunks of the state where it just simply wouldn't be possible. And the way the rules were written was, if you lose the radio link, the drone lands. That's what it comes down to. Very, very strict rules. No drone today would be capable of the network restrictions that they needed for it. So it would be a very fast obsolescence of everything we have right now. Amateur drones, so the recreational side that a lot of commercial pilots use to train with, would be very, very difficult to legally operate those outside of one of those like AMA fields at the FRIAs. The FRIAs, they want to kill off. So they said for 12 months, they would take FRIA registrations, and then there could never be another FRIA. So a lot of this translates to increased costs on the hobby side, but that also directly affects people on the commercial side. I got into the hobby side myself. I said I started on the GIS side. I never wanted to fly stuff. Once I got into it, I realized, yeah, you know, I should probably try this out and get into the hobby side and, you know, practice my stick skills and things like that. So I got into the hobby side as a way of being a better commercial pilot. And all of these things there were a lot of downsides in there. So lawsuits, a lot of just general outrage over the restrictions that were coming. The final rules look almost nothing like the initial proposal. They had a 3-month public comment phase where 50,000 comments were submitted. So if you think about that in the context of numbers, there are 215,000 commercially certified pilots, 50,000 comments. That you know, 215,000 excludes all the recreational folks, and there's thought to be over 1 million of those. But there was a lot of action on this, both in favor of it and against it in some cases. And many pilots sort of had this conflict of saying, parts of this are great. The parts that are going to let us get to beyond visual line of sight flight are fantastic, but the restrictions to get there, we just can't digest right now. So the final rules rolled out, and they really didn't look a whole lot like the initial proposal. The first thing, they got rid of the network requirement right out of the launch. There's no network portion of those rules anymore. It is local broadcast only. So effectively, the drone itself will just put out a little ping, and it's going to be in some frequency like Wi-Fi or Bluetooth. They want it to be a publicly accessible band. And it will also allow retrofit modules. So basically a tiny little unit will just be a little ping saying, here I am, here's my lat long, here's my elevation, here's my tag number, and no controller location. That is another key part. A lot of people objected to having the controller location be publicly accessible on a broadcast simply for physical safety. If you think about the dollar signs attached to all of the gear that you're out there when you're working, you know, you have a $5,000 to $10,000 drone, you have computers, you have survey equipment, all kinds of very expensive stuff with you, and you've got your eyes on the sky. A lot of folks objected, saying I'm going to be a sitting duck out there, to just anybody who can look up on the internet where there's a pilot flying right now. So a lot of feedback about that. Much simpler broadcast requirements. Night operations are still coming. You're going to have to pass an additional training to do that. Existing pilots, so I am not presently night certified. They just rolled this out. When I recertify, I will be able to use material to say that I know what I'm doing. I've passed the new night requirements. Pilots that go out and take the test now will have night operations on it. So it's just going to become a piece of the training. Anybody commercially certified will be able to access it. Flight over people will be allowed with there's a lot of restrictions there. They still want, there's a lot of safety gear involved, qualifications of what kind of crowd you're over, that sort of thing. They basically want to make sure that it's not going to fall out of the sky and hurt somebody. Flight over people, that's not really so big for the GIS and survey crowd though. FRIAs, the training grounds, those are going to be able to be created ongoing, no more shutdown of those. And the recertification, this is one of my favorite parts. The recertification is going to be very simplified, and it's going to be free. Currently, you have to take a test to get your 107, and then every 2 years you have to retest. Your 107 certificate itself stays good forever, but you can only use that 107 if you've recertified every 2 years. Kind of an interesting nuance of the regulations there. The test costs $150, and you can only take it at 3 places in the state. It's not, completely onerous, but it's not easy. It takes some time for some folks that have to drive to get to the place. You have to get an appointment. The FAA is changing that, and supposedly next week they're going to say this is what the new online test looks like, and it's going to supposed to look a lot more like the similar idea of continuing education credits that groups like surveyors are currently going through. So I'm really excited about that. I actually needed to recertify last summer, and with COVID, all the testing sites shut down. So I did what was a 6-month extension, and I'm up for renewal again. So I'm really hoping they're going to put some good online materials up. The FAA actually has a huge online education platform for their manned pilot stuff. The rollout of this is going to come over the next 3 years. So the laws are actually in the Federal Register, and they're starting to kick in. They're going to phase in. So by the end of a 3-year period, the broadcast requirements are going to be there. The retrofit units are supposedly going to be on the market. But the interesting thing about this is the rules are on the books now, and they're going to begin to apply. But presently, there are no retrofit RID units. There are no RID ready drones on the market right now because the final implementation of that has no approvals right now. FRIAs don't exist. The expectation is that the AMA fields will all be FRIAs, but other groups may create FRIAs as well. The recurrent certification is supposed to get easier. The original date was March 1st, and then on March 2nd, they said, actually, we're going to let you know on the 16th. So that should be hopefully much lower bar in the future. And the expectation is that beyond visual line of sight regulations are going to be coming very soon and accompanying this. Nobody really entirely knows what that's going to look like, but the remote ID stuff is going to unlock some of this stuff that we want to do, which is the good stuff is coming. So how does this translate into actual drones that we fly? Most folks are familiar with multirotors, things like quadcopters, hexacopters, octocopters. There's even dodecacopters now. They're pretty useful up to on a battery, up to maybe about 150 acres if you're doing a common mapping exercise. You can get maybe 30 minutes of flight time if it's a nice calm day and you're not getting pushed around in the wind. You can do photogrammetry and LiDAR from those platforms, and they're getting really, really affordable. The sensors are way more cost than the drones at this point, and that's a pretty cool place to be in terms of technology. Fixed wings are the other sort of big piece of the pie that folks are familiar with right now. It's more like a miniature airplane, so it has a prop that either pushes or pulls it around in the air. Those could potentially go hundreds of acres or hundreds of miles even, depending on the aircraft itself. And they can stay in the air for much, much longer. So they're very well suited to doing this large area work, and they can also carry the same payloads that a multirotor can. They start to get a little more expensive. But the really interesting part that should be coming soon is what we call vertical takeoff and landing craft. And these are things that are actually common in other countries now that we don't have access to here because they just don't make sense outside the context of beyond visual line of sight. Those can go, hundreds and hundreds of acres, thousands of acres, or linear flights, doing something like a corridor mapping run, going hundreds of miles. They have flight times way over an hour. Some of them have hybrid engines where they have a mixture of gas, liquid fuel powered combustion engine and electrical engines for lift. So they take off like a helicopter and they fly like a fixed wings. Those we see those in countries all over the world that have much more open restrictions on the types of flights. So the interesting things here are we can do the same payloads on any type of these craft, but it's the craft themselves have a much bigger effect on range and practical use. So when we talk about multirotors, this is the type of thing that we see. These are all these are actually some photos I took at our the last conference I was able to attend in person before all the COVID travel lockdowns. This was a drone conference in China, so that's why you can't read any of the signs that are in here. This is simply a hexacopter, so it has 6 rotors that spin like a helicopter blade, carries a payload that would hang under the belly. So a lot of folks are familiar with the multi-rotor style platform. Not really a whole lot to say about it. It's your typical quadcopter, hexacopter, octocopter. The little sensor on the table there is, in this case, it's a dual sensor module. So it has a camera, and I think it was either, I think that one was either an infrared or a thermal camera on it as well. Your typical fixed wing. So they look a lot like airplanes, just little miniature airplanes. You'll see on the one in the front here, it's very easy to see the camera lens in the bottom of it. So large, long scale photogrammetry type craft. So these are the ones, we launch them out of a slingshot. It flies like a plane, it lands like a plane, needs a little more room to do that. And then this is where things are going to get really interesting in the future. So this is a vertical takeoff and landing. You'll notice there are 4 quadcopter blades, but there's also a pusher prop in the back of this. Large compartment, it's able to carry a very robust sensor payload, takes off like a quadcopter, lifts vertically straight up, then the pusher prop kicks in and it flies like an airplane using the wings for lift. So these types of craft are common in places like China. Even Canada has now started approving limited use of beyond visual line of sight. These are very well suited to long range missions, things like corridor mapping and stuff like that, because they can go hundreds of miles. So you'll see the people standing in here for perspective. This is a much bigger craft than we typically see in the US, because within that line of sight restriction, it doesn't make sense. We just don't need a craft that big. It doesn't need to go as far, and it doesn't need to carry quite as much. Going up in scale a little bit even, this one looks really big because it is huge. The wingspan on this thing was probably about 20 feet across. And the 2-cylinder engine in the back there, you'll see that's actually a gas powered pusher engine. This one had a range of about 500 miles. Could carry a huge payload. You'll notice there's actually octo configuration there on all of the props. So these things, imagine going out and doing, say, a LiDAR survey of an entire power line corridor, or going out and doing a photogrammetry mission for an entire forest stand owned by one of the paper companies up north or something like that. So there's a huge amount of opportunity coming. The major breakdowns of these is the night operations. They're going to get much more legal more easily. So right now, if you the rules are in place, they're starting to grant approvals for night operations. Those still have to be within line of sight, but it's improving access to things like LiDAR and thermal data collection. There are things where the sun interferes with bright sunlight, can mess with a LiDAR return. And likewise with thermal data, if you've got the sun warming up surfaces, that can interfere with the patterns of where your thermal imagery is showing the warm spots and showing the cool spots. Also, the air tends to stabilize at night, so you can get a little bit more out of your batteries and so on. The picture on the left here is actually a next generation DJI sensor. A lot of folks are familiar with the DJI camera platforms. Typically, we're talking about a single, color imagery based setup. This one actually has 6 hyperspectral sensors on it. It's one of the next generation that's going to be coming along. In terms of what we do now, photogrammetry data collection, orthomosaics and terrain mapping and things like that, with the advent of beyond visual line of sight, we're going to be able to operate over much, much larger areas. We think about some of the up north places where we're doing forest stand mapping. We can do a few hundred acres, but that restriction of visual line of sight means you need crew on the ground spaced out with radio communication to do large scale mapping. And likewise, you're paying all that staff on the ground. They have to be in radio contact with each other. They fly automated flight paths to do these collections. So it's essentially a bunch of people standing around watching a drone through the trees to get the data we need. These types of extended operations that are going to be enabled through beyond visual line of sight, that are basically the step after the remote ID capabilities, these are where it's really going to unlock what we can do in terms of mapping operations. As well, with the new reporting is supposed to make it easier to operate around restricted airspaces like airports. We really only have a few of those around the state, but you'd be surprised actually how many small airports there are that interfere with commercial operation just a little bit. If you're trying to do a survey right near one, maybe there's a highway interchange you're trying to do an as-built on, getting that authorization is sometimes a little bit tricky. But as well, it's also going to get easier to stay current with all of the flight certifications, particularly the 107 certificate. These new regulations are really going to crack that open on making it easy for people to stay compliant, stay legal, and stay safe. So there's some really good stuff coming along. I know I've been squirting a fire hose at you about drone stuff. There's places in state where you can reach out if you want to take some of the next steps. There is a social group called the Maine Drone Society that is headquartered at the Open Bench project down in Portland. It's basically a social group for pilots, both amateur recreational pilots and commercial operators. There's a Facebook group. It's quite active. There's a lot of race events that go on. There's a lot of folks talking about repair information and just how to do general operations and things like that. There's also a Discord server, so it's a really good social opportunity to reach out to other pilots and just ask questions. And as well, a lot of folks don't know about the aviation department at the University of Maine at Augusta. They have an entire degree program in drone operations, but you can also take individual classes. This is actually where I took my Part 107 certification test. Personally, I can't recommend it enough. It's a great program, really gets you ready to go think about piloting an aircraft that costs a few $1,000s when you've never done it. So a lot of good information there. If you have any extended questions beyond, please feel free to reach out to me directly. My email is right there on screen. And I think I'll hand it back to Judy and Patrick to see if we have any questions that have come in.
Great. Thanks, Sam. That was really interesting. One question we had is it worth getting certified now with all the rule changes? I don't know if you touched on that.
Yeah, and I think it's absolutely still worth pursuing. The industry is not shrinking. It's not like opportunities are going to be closed off. With the changes that are taking place, getting certified right now actually gets you more than getting certified did when I got certified. The night operations is a big one. Flights over people as well. There's going to be it's a good time to start because as you do your initial prep and get ready to go with this, there's really only going to be more possibilities coming in the future. It's not like a lot of people had that initial freak out and they're like, oh, the drone industry is going to die. But it's the exact opposite. The drone industry is growing like crazy. What we can do with it in terms of GIS is only growing. There's new kinds of sensors, there's new kinds of cameras coming on all the time. If you like technology, it is a fascinating area to learn stuff about. So I would say if you're even thinking about getting certified a little bit, just go do it.
Thanks, Sam. Another question that we have is there any word on when the supplemental training for night will be rolled out?
I would love to know that myself. I wrote to the FAA just the other day because it was March 2nd and they were supposed to put a lot of the new certification stuff online on the 1st, and the latest word is that more information is supposed to be coming after the 16th, I believe was the date they pushed it out. They just weren't able to get everything set. This may or may not be correct, but I do believe that if you go do certification, initial certification now, or if you do a recurrent test, I believe that material is already on those tests. Those would be the tests that you pay for. The state of the recurrent, the new free recurrent tests that can be done online, I'm not sure of what the timeline is on those, and I need it myself, so I hope it's soon.
It looks like, so somebody else in the audience, Dave Tewksbury, has said that the latest dates for Part 107 update and training is now April 21st, and it'll go into effect at that point.
All right, good information.
So maybe that is further information.
Any other questions, folks? Please throw them in the questions panel. Dave also said the recurrent test is now supposed to be available on April 6th. He's getting that from the FAA. Do you have any insight into, would you say, is it worth investing in drone hardware now or waiting, or?
There's a lot of interesting stuff there. So if you were to say, you know, you're maybe just starting out, or even if you're already a mature pilot, hardware that you buy right now, you can definitely fly for at least the next almost three full years. If you look at the state of change in drone ops, a unit that you buy today, if you're still flying that in 3 years, you've gotten an amazing lifespan out of that. The hardware tends to come and go. The state of the art is constantly pushing forward. So there's not really a huge reason to not buy data, not buy hardware to make data with, rather. And likewise, it's not like there's going to be a hard limit on operating that. So right now, the main new thing is going to be beyond visual line of sight. No drone you buy right now is necessarily going to be able to do that when it comes, but the types of operations you can do right now, so things like LiDAR collection, photogrammetry collection, and so on, we're still going to be able to operate those drones as we do now, with the addition of a remote ID module being added to them. I would imagine many drones, things like the DJI series of drones, very, very common. They're the ultimate plain vanilla drones. Because of the remote ID technology being things like Bluetooth based or Wi-Fi based, for many of those drones, it is very likely to only be a firmware update to unlock some of these the reporting capabilities. So I wouldn't say it's a huge risk just because of the lifespan of drone hardware, but also because of the very likely future use, even if your drone is still surviving that long. So I wouldn't have too many reservations about investing in hardware right now.
Judy, do you have seen any other questions there, or?
Sorry about that. So one question is, what's the process for building your own drone?
That is a big question. If you want to build your own drone, there are a gazillion kits out there. It's also kind of a two-part question. There's two directions you can go. If you're talking about a commercial drone, there's a lot more expensive level of hardware. If you're talking about a recreational drone, very, very much more approachable. If you've never built a drone before, my recommendation would be focus on something more on the recreational side. They're a little bit lower risk, they're a little bit simpler. There are a number of incredibly helpful YouTube channels out there that walk you through a complete build. A lot of them come from companies like Get FPV or Race Day Quads. They have complete kits that come with everything you need. If you want to go to the sort of next level and you're going to pick out your components and you know, pick every individual thing, it's very possible to do that as well. You just need to be ready for a little bit of a technical learning curve. Let's see, there's one particular YouTube channel I would point anyone at that wants to build their own drone. There's a YouTuber named Joshua Bardwell. He's known as the FPV know-it-all, and that is a well-deserved reputation. He's an amazing resource for getting into the hobby side, and it's all stuff that directly translates over to building anything, whether it's going to be a commercial side or hobby side drone. For simplicity, I would encourage folks to probably focus on a hobby side build. There's a lot of soldering involved. If you don't know how to solder, that is a skill that is essentially required. There are a lot of sort of funny takes on getting into the hobby. We say build, fly, crash, repeat. I've built a few drones where it was in the air for a grand total of 30 seconds before it disintegrates or has what we call an unplanned landing. Then you're back to the bench. You know, sometimes it's just messing with firmware if it's not flying quite right, messing with settings, tuning your controller. It's a very, very deep dive technical hobby. My last piece of that would be, if you're thinking about building your own drone, I would definitely point you at the Maine Drone Society as a great resource where you can talk to other pilots in the area. You can actually go down to the Drone Society headquarters, and folks will, you know, you can arrange to have folks like walk you through the actual building process if you're a complete novice.
Gotcha. I mean, I would say that, you know, Sam is pretty handy. You are an advisor for the local robotics club. That's kind of your thing. But even so, I remember when we put our first drone in the air for Blue Marble, how nerve-wracking it is, and you're just wondering, you know, is this $2,000 going to go right down the tube in 2 seconds? It's a process.
It's definitely a nail biter on that first flight.
So, are you seeing any other questions, Judy, or?
Just Vinton pointed out that besides the UMA classes, that USM also has a drone class in the fall, taught by Professor Mark Swanson. So that's another option for people who are interested in the topic.
Oh yeah, and for sure at other areas of the UMaine system, I know at the main campus in Orono, they're doing a lot with drones in the Barbara Wheatland lab. So I'm sure there's some educational opportunities there. And then you may recall from a few years back, we did a drone workshop with, was it UMaine Fort Kent or Presque Isle?
I think Presque Isle, I thought.
Yeah, so there's stuff even up at the top of the state, as it were. Well, great. If we missed your question or you have any other questions, you can always contact us and email us at megugbboard@gmail.com, and you can certainly get a hold of Sam directly as well. He's Sam K at bluemarblegeo.com. Thank you everybody for joining us. This will be recorded and posted on our website as long as the recording comes out okay. Thank you, Sam, for your time. We will be back again in April and looking for other topics as we mentioned, and we mention every month. So thanks so much, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.